Everybody, welcome back to IS 325, the Contemporary Muslim World. It's me, Bill L. Smith, and I'm here to talk today in this module about sport in the Muslim world. And it's definitely a thing about which I'm passionate. The idea of studying sport as a way to understand a culture, a society, indeed the entire world, and how governments and intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations fit together. Sometimes conflicting, sometimes partnering, but using sport as the lens is always been a very useful way for me to understand things. In fact, pretty much my birth as someone who's interested in international studies as a field is through sports and engaging with sports as a young boy, and then becoming aware of differences among people that were being played out in common spaces. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about sport that gives us the opportunity to do. I do teach a class called IS 350 Sport and International Affairs every other fall. So if you're still around next fall and you're interested in it, please sign up. It shouldn't come to it as any surprise to you that it isn't just me or individuals who are interested in sport, but that it's formally looked at by the OIC and by member states as well. Many of you are probably aware, certainly aware of the Olympics, and may or may not be aware that lots of different organizations have big sporting events akin to the Olympics where member states or member sporting organizations come and compete. So there's something called the Pan American Games that involves all the countries in this hemisphere. There are Asian Games, and there are African Games, and there are military games and World University Games, and a whole host of other things. There's also, through the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, Islamic Solidarity Games. And this comes through the Islamic Solidarity Sports Foundation, which comes out of pretty early negotiations in the OIC, where they're trying to build commonality. We've kind of emphasized what is common about the OIC and what brings states together, that common interest in Islam. But as you've seen throughout the class, there's lots of other things that drive Muslim states apart, because it isn't as if that one sort of identifier of being Muslim means that there's no other kinds of conflict or issues between the states. And so sports and culture is one of those places where you might be able to have some common interests. So the ISSF logo is on here. There have been 4 games, actually 3, because one was canceled in 2009 because of unrest in the region. There's going to be a 5th in 2021 in Turkey, and so these will be OIC member states coming and competing in something that would remind you of the Olympics, just competed by Muslim states. Then they also would compete in Asian Games if they're Asian Muslim states, Pan American Games if they're American states that are Muslim or in the OIC. Etc. So then there's even other levels like the Francophone Games, which are former French colonies that compete together in these sorts of open cultural exchanges. So there's lots of other ways in which sports will manifest, but this one is that common games with Islam as the reason to come together in the sporting competition. What sports are popular in the Muslim world? Boy, this one is as broad as any of the topics we've talked about some for. How about badminton is a very important sport in Indonesia. Indonesia has the reigning gold medal winner in the Olympics. In badminton, there's big arenas for badminton. It's an important sport there, and I may be partial to it because I actually lettered in badminton in high school in a weird sort of confluence of events. So I pay attention to places that are interested in badminton because it's such an odd and unique thing. But the array of sports is quite broad in what matters. So when you're looking at how to sort of measure sports and how it might play out, there's a concept called sports space, which is a whole module on, a whole unit on in IS 350. But you're essentially trying to measure what's possible to use sort of formally as a structure. So sport in general is what the OIC is trying to use in the Islamic Solidarity Games, the whole thing, to bring folks together. But sometimes sports is used for sort of domestic messaging purposes, like who we are internally as a people. And sometimes sports is used as an external messaging thing when you're trying to talk to the rest of the world about why you're important and why you're relevant. And what's interesting about this is you kind of need the sport then to be replicated by many national spaces in order for it to be useful internationally. And that means that something like cricket here, which is on the bottom, is perhaps more relevant and more interesting in terms of what the Muslim states do with it than some sports that are more localized. And so cricket is one of the major global sports. Pakistan won the Cricket World Championship in 1992, has finished second a couple of other times. Pretty important when Pakistan goes up against England. England had been the colonizing power. The United Kingdom had been the colonizing power. England has its own national team in cricket and brought the game to Pakistan. But there's all kinds of other things. This is Sarah Ahmad, who's a medal winner from Egypt in the last Olympics. We've got a judoka. Or is it Taekwondo? I get Taekwondo and Judo confused sometimes in photos here, and a Kazakh boxer, also all medal winners. And so these sports are important, and the ones that are in shared sports spaces get utilized differently and more often than the ones that are more unique. So, for example, there has only been one OIC member state all time that's won a medal in the Winter Olympics. It's Kazakhstan, and it does have it has a Russian portion, so even though 70% of Kazakhstan is Muslim, there is 30% which are more Central European and sort of participate in more traditionally Russian sports. So but Kazakhstan does compete, but most Muslim states, if you look at where they are geographically, don't participate in, or at least not in any robust way, in winter sports. So if you're looking at like whether a sport matters, if you're trying to compete directly against Russia for those Central European states or Central Asian states that broke away from the Soviet Union, they can't really use winter sports because they're not shared between the two. But soccer is, judo is, wrestling is, and several others, and so it gives a chance to use those. So for sports in the Muslim world, it's endless. Certainly on the domestic level. If you're trying to talk about the international level, then the ones that are most commonly played: cricket, soccer in particular, and then a handful of others come up repeatedly. There are peculiar uses for sport in the Muslim world, and one of them that's important is recognition and legitimacy. You try to say, sort of take the idea that sport confers status. So one advantage that sports has is that lots of people pay attention to it all across the world. And so what it means is that you don't have to do a comprehensive public relations campaign and try and figure out how to get on the radar of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of people when you can take advantage of a sporting event and be parcel to it that gives you a chance to manifest there. So recognition and legitimacy can come through sport. Palestine, which as you know from other conversations in class, is an aspirant state. It's one that the OIC has a vested interest in trying to get increased recognition. It struggles for that recognition politically, but in the sporting realm, they have their own national team. And one author that I like to read, he sometimes says that if you have a national team, it stands to reason that you have a nation. So Palestine has a national team in soccer, in the Olympics, and in other sports, and therefore confers some legitimacy, some stature, some status that may not be forthcoming in the United Nations. Dubai and the United Arab Emirates, they've tried to use sport, particularly hosting, for example, the International Cricket Council, for hosting all kinds of training facilities, and they're conversing about having something called Dubai Sports City, which would be sort of an all-inclusive place where someone like me could retire and go to top-level sporting events, even if it's just off-season training. They're hosting Grand Prix races and golf events and a whole host of other things there in Dubai, and using it to be on the radar of lots of people, particularly as they try to transition from being an oil-only state to one that offers more, and that sports could be that more. Qatar, which is a Muslim state in the Gulf, also along with the UAE, is the host of the 2022 World Cup. And we could talk a lot about that and what's transpired since then. But the reason and rationale, though, was that they could really make an announcement as to who they were and what Qatar is capable of if they were able to host the World Cup, be named as host of the World Cup. And in something of an upset when they were named host about 8 years ago, they will be hosting in 2022. All kinds of issues related with that, but it is conferring, to them at least, and in the eyes of others, recognition and legitimacy. There's lots of criticism in the run-up to it about issues and problems associated with the bid and with how they treat their migrant workers and stuff in the run-up. But because I've watched this play out several times in my lifetime and studied it as a matter of course, once the tournament starts, the story will change, and sort of the negative stories will fall away, and people will be enamored of what's taking place in Qatar, and you will see that legitimacy conferred by having hosted the tournament. sports in the OIC and sports in the Muslim world is also used for other kinds of political purposes. And one of the things that they do through sport is isolate Israel. So Israel has a problematic relationship with its Arab and Muslim neighbors. It has a legacy of conflict with them. And this is one that plays out in whether they have diplomatic recognition and whether they share ambassadors, whether they want to kind of recognize Israel as existing. So Israel is located on the Asian continent. It was part of Asian Games, Asian World Cups, or Asian Cups, soccer cups, not the World Cup, but the Asian Cup, into the mid 70s when the Muslim states in Asia decided they would boycott the games unless Israel was banished from participating in the game. So Israel actually is isolated through sport and not allowed to participate as an Asian country. In fact, they participate in Europe for the purposes of sport. Iran takes this to an extreme, and so this is a picture of a couple of Iranian, one Iranian, one Israeli judoka. So Sagi Muki is Israeli, Saeed Molai is Iranian. Iran has a history in judo of making sure that if an Iranian athlete is going to meet an Israeli athlete in the tournament, as you have eliminations and you go towards the final, that they will make sure the Iranian throws an earlier match or withdraws from the tournament to ensure they don't confer recognition in Israel by competing with them. And Saeed Molai refused to do this in 2019 and was in a lot of trouble in Iran, had to flee to Germany. And so this is a picture of the two of them later on. A lot of times these things that are decided on by federations, sporting federations, and or governments are not accepted on the individual level, but they have to be played out because in some of those societies where you have less democracy and more of a command structure, going against the regime's wishes and competing would be a bad thing. But judo is a peculiar place because both they get drawn into tournaments against one another periodically, and so it plays out repeatedly. A sort of a grab bag here. One of the other things it does is provide space to have safe competition, like and other kinds of recognition. So we'll start in this top corner briefly. This is a picture of Papa Bouba Diop, who actually just died about a month ago. He's a Senegalese football player. In 2002, Senegal, which is a largely Muslim country, played France, which is largely not, but has several immigrants, including one you can see on the screen, Yuri Djorkaeff, who are Muslim and who represent France. So France colonized Senegal, and France, as the defending champion of the World Cup, opened the tournament against Senegal, one of its former colonies, and Papa Bouba Diop scored a goal. Senegal scored the massive upset. It's a really big deal, not just in recognition and legitimacy, but in being the best or better than the West. So if you fight a war or you get involved in a trade conflict or something happens that you, as a Muslim state, might come out on the losing end against the West. But if you're in sports, you can win and be the best. And so that one's a very memorable moment for me watching the Senegalese win that game. Bottom right is Iran and the United States wrestling against one another. So for most of the time from 1979 to 2017, wrestling was really the only avenue open to exchanges between Iran and the United States. It was a place where we could share competition and be open and involved. That changed in 2017, unfortunately, when Trump announced his Muslim ban, the ban on Muslim immigrants, seen and called a Muslim ban in Iran. Iran stopped inviting U.S. wrestlers to come participate in wrestling championships. Quite a bummer. Ruqayya Al-Ghasra, here on the bottom left, she was the first a woman to wear hijab and compete in the Olympics. She was a Bahraini runner. And that kind of example is a really important one. The hijab's been very controversial in sporting circles. I've got a reading for you, or a brief video about when FIFA tried to ban the hijab, but now they're much more athletic equipment. Up here in the corner is Nadia Nadim. So her story as an Afghan refugee who competed and represented Denmark after she fled Afghanistan and became one of the best strikers in the world is an inspiring and interesting one. And to begin to wrap up here, I don't usually have a picture on the final slide, but this is Muhammad Ali, arguably one of the most famous and influential figures to the average person in the 20th century, who was a boxer from the United States, who converted to Islam, and who was the heavyweight champion of the world, and really worth following. I'm not the only one. Mo Salah, you're going to read about others. This is how a lot of us first get engaged with the Muslim world, and it's worth looking at.